Thank you for joining us this evening. This is Unlocking the Ballot, Ensuring Voting Rights in Michigan for Incarcerated Voters. And this is on jail voting rights in Michigan. It is a joint project of the Detroit Public Library, the Voting Access for All Coalition, and the League of Women Voters of Detroit. Tonight, their panelists are Tony Gant from VAAC and Nation Outside, Carmen Lopez, the Sentencing Project, Carolyn Madden, League of Women Voters, Michigan, Lisa Brown, Oakland County Clerk, Bonnie Zabel, Voting Access for All Coalition, Jasmine, I think it was, Ross, Colorado Criminal Justice Reform Coalition. I'm sorry, I didn't pay enough attention to your pronunciation. Aliana Belknap, Colorado Common Cause. I'm sorry, again, I didn't ask for the pronunciation. And Bianca Emerson, JD of Colorado Black Women for Political Action. And tonight, Charles Thomas, who is a member of League of Women Voters Detroit and a great many other organizations, will moderate and give the welcome and the opening remarks. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, Jennifer, and good evening to everyone. First, let me say that it is good to have everyone that is in this session coming in for a very important subject that we're going to be dealing with on today. And so first, let me just thank the Detroit Public Library and Jennifer for having us, along with the League of Women Voters of Detroit, which has been stated. I am a member as well as on the state board of the League and a host of other organizations that we don't have time to really go into. But on behalf of the League, let me just say that it is an organization that is all about voting, all about ensuring that voting rights are upheld and that anything that stands in the way of voting is eliminated. And I just want to read their statement, our statement from the website. And it says, empowering voters and defending democracy. The League of Women Voters of Detroit encourages informed and active participation in government. We envision a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate. And so, again, I'm grateful to be able to come into this space on behalf of the League in collaboration with the Detroit Public Library, and to have such an esteemed and knowledgeable panel that will be coming before us on the subject for today, Unlocking the Ballot, Ensuring Voting Rights in Michigan for Incarcerated Citizens. This is not a subject that is commonly known when it comes to the rights of citizens in Michigan after they are in some way justice impacted. And so we will have a lot of good information coming from a lot of knowledgeable people on this evening. And so the purpose of the event is just that, to make it known what the rights are of citizens who are justice impacted, and to maybe pass along some information that might help all of those that are in the fight to ensure that no rights are in any way suppressed when it comes to voting, that we'll be more equipped after we go through this session. And so before we go any further, I want to give a couple of minutes to each of our panelists, and I'll name them one by one to introduce themselves and some of their work, give them a couple of minutes to do so. First, I want to start with Tony Gant from Voting Access for All Coalition and Nation Outside.
Thank you, Charles, and happy Tuesday, everybody. I'm excited to be here. As I mentioned earlier, well, you guys weren't on, so I'll start all over. I am one of the co-executive directors for Nation Outside. We're a grassroots organization in the state of Michigan, led entirely by the formerly incarcerated. And our mission is really to knock down the barriers that people with criminal histories face. I'm also on leadership with VAC, and I'm excited about the fact that finally we're having robust conversations around jail-based voting in the state of Michigan. It has been a long time coming, and I'm glad that you all are here. And thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And before I introduce the next panelist, if you have any questions along the way, please put them in the chat and we will address them when we get to the end of the session. The next panelist is Carmen Lopez from the Sentencing Project.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for including me in this wonderful group of people to talk about their work. I work on jail-based voting for the Sentencing Project, and I support advocacy campaigns across the country who are either through legislative action or through direct action with sheriffs and election officials instituting or expanding jail-based voting programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. Next, we'll have Carolyn Madden from the League of Women Voters. I believe she's out of Washtenaw County.
Yes, I'm out of Washtenaw County. I'm on the advocacy committee there, and I'm on the advocacy committee for the state. And in both of those roles, I focus on criminal legal issues and legislation. I'm also a volunteer in the National Lifers of America at Huron Valley Women's Prison. And I'm an advocate and educator for restorative justice, and I'm on a number of my semi-programming, particularly programming committee to get more programming in the prison. And I'm very pleased to be here with all these people, and I'm going to learn more than I'm going to bring, I think. Thanks.
Thank you, Carolyn. Next, we have the Oakland County Clerk, Lisa Brown.
Thank you, Charles. First, I want to give a disclaimer. If you hear a weird noise, it's my dog squeaking her toy. There, it just went. She's not strong enough to make the full squeak noise, so it makes a weird noise. Anyway, I'm the Oakland County Clerk, Register of Deeds. I was first elected to this position in 2012. And I earned my certified elections registration administrator designation, which is the highest designation an elections administrator can receive. And I'm honored to be on this panel with so many esteemed people who do such great work. I want to thank them all for the work that they do. I'm very passionate about making sure everyone has access to the ballot, and it's great to be among other people who share the same passion. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Next, we'll have Bonnie Zabel from Voting Access for All Coalition as well.
Hi, everybody. Yes, as Charles just said, I'm Bonnie Zabel. I am the current Director of Legislative and Jail Voting Policy for Voting Access for All Coalition. I'm a social and criminal justice reform advocate. I'm a dedicated volunteer. I also work with the NLA, and most importantly, I am a mother of an incarcerated son, and that's how I got involved in all of this important policy work. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Bonnie. Next, we'll have Jasmine Ross from Colorado Criminal Justice Reform Coalition.
Awesome. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jasmine Ross, she, her pronouns. I serve as the Civic Engagement and Volunteer Program Manager at the Colorado Criminal Justice Reform Coalition. I have been privileged to witness the incredible impact of our organization's advocacy work over the last 7 years. Founded in 1999 by Executive Director Christy Donner, CCJRC has been dedicated to eliminating the overuse of the criminal justice system and advancing community health and safety. This year marks our 25th anniversary, a milestone that speaks volumes about our commitment to creating positive change. Our work is solely focused on resentencing reform, community reinvestment, supporting women in the system, and voter restoration rights. Through collaboration with community organizations, election workers, and jail program administrators, we have made significant strides in ensuring that individuals involved in the criminal justice system have access to their constitutional right to vote. I am excited to have a more in-depth conversation about this work with you all this evening. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jasmine. Next, we'll have Allie Belknap from the Colorado Common Cause.
Jennifer.
I see she placed in the chat, I don't have access to unmuting or turning on my camera. And so while we try to get that worked out, I'm going to
I will
go
make
ahead
sure she's connected.
Okay, Bianca Emerson from Colorado Black Women for Political Action.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here this afternoon. I'm the president of Colorado Black Women for Political Action. We were founded in 1977 by the first African-American female state senator in the state of Colorado. And we have partnered with organizations like CCJRC, Yasmin, and also my other colleague here, Ali, to advocate for policies and legislation and legislators that will have the best interest of Black Coloradans. So really excited to be here and look forward to the conversation ahead. Thank you.
All right, and we'll go back up to Ali.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me today. I am really excited to be here. My name is Ali Belknap. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of Colorado Common Cause. Yeah, very excited to be here alongside our partners in the state who are fighting for a lot of really incredible work, reform, program work that brings folks into our democracy who've been historically disenfranchised. The work that we primarily do in the state, the first thing is election protection and voter support. So we work to essentially make sure that we're identifying any barriers and access issues that Colorado voters are experiencing so that we can work with our county clerks, our Secretary of State, and other folks in the space to ensure that folks have access to voting and to ensure that we have a legal response to any issues that go unaddressed. The other thing that we do is we work alongside our partners to pass policies that make Colorado's democracy more accessible and equitable. So all the things that we're seeing on the field, the things we're hearing from communities, we're able to then turn that into comprehensive reform to move our state forward. So very excited to stand alongside our partners in the work that is ongoing and has been done in our state to ensure that folks who are in jail or who have a background in the criminal system have access to voting. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Ali. And I'm going to give a virtual applause to all of our attendees, as well as our panelists. And we're going to dig into this subject and a lot more into what's going on in Colorado as we go along. But I just want to read something very quickly from the Prison Policy Initiative when it comes to Michigan. It says, Michigan has an incarceration rate of 599 per 100,000 people, including prisons, jails, immigration, detention, and juvenile justice facilities, meaning that it locks up a higher percentage of its people than almost any democratic country on earth. It also says that the number of people impacted by county and city jails in Michigan is much larger than what's shown on the graph that I have before me that you all cannot see, but it says each year at least 163,000 different people are booked into local jails in Michigan. And so this is a very important subject that we need to converse about when it comes to the rights of citizens, specifically when it comes to voting in the state of Michigan. And so we're going to start off with the question of what is jail voting? And I'm going to place that question before Bonnie so that she can explain to us and explain to everybody on the screen what we mean when we say or use the phrase jail voting.
Thanks, Charles. Yeah, I'm going to give you a little history on VAC, and then that'll kind of all form itself as I go through talking about VAC and who we are as a coalition. So again, as I introduced myself earlier, I'm the Director of Legislative and Jail Voting Policy for VAC. That is the Voting Access for All Coalition. We emerged in the spring of 2020 to give a voice to those impacted by the criminal legal system. We're a coalition of individuals and organizations. We represent those who have been incarcerated and those who have not, who feel voting is empowering and powerful. We know that any barrier to voting, whether it's logistical, informational, or lack of trust in the process, is voter suppression, and we must confront that. Our mission is to ensure that all persons in pretrial situations, individuals about to be released from prison, and those formerly incarcerated, along with their families and community members, have the opportunity and knowledge they need to exercise their right to vote in every election. Right now, our coalition is working on 4 primary goals. Community voting outreach. This is the goal we have to do community outreach, and that is to inform people with the felony conviction and if they are on parole, that they still have a right to vote, and enable them in exercising that right. We're also working on ending prison gerrymandering, encouraging civic engagement, and most importantly, as we're talking about tonight, jail voting. We have outreach to those held in Michigan jails with pretrial, provides them with education and support to exercise their right to vote. And currently, with our coalition partners, many that are on here tonight, we are working on a state legislative policy to require that all 83 counties in the state of Michigan have a voting plan available. We do this by providing the assistance by partnering with the jails and detention facilities who house eligible voters in their custody. We work together to develop regionally specific educational materials and enable the facilities to provide this helpful information to their incarcerated voters. We continue to build relationships and form alliances with organizations that support and uplift this work. We share resources with coalition partners and working to strengthen clerk engagement within the county jail facilities. We can also train volunteers to host registration events at their local jails, as well as supply deputized volunteers to aid and address voters' concerns directly. Additionally, we offer free materials, including voting registration applications, absentee ballot request paperwork, nonpartisan voter guides, and election deadline reminders at no cost to the facilities or voters. And we also assist in facilitating the timely receipt and return of absentee ballots by facilitating the mailing and completed mail ballots as soon as practicable. Lastly, in addition to working directly with jail facilities in all 83 counties, we have produced a report on voting in jail in Michigan alongside Nation Outside, which we are using to advocate for systematic change across the state. We meet every Friday on Zoom from 12:30 to 1:30. If you'd like to join us, you can learn more at votingaccessforall.org. And I want to thank you again for spending time with us today.
Thank you, Bonnie. And as you can hear with everything that she said, jail voting is a complicated process in the state of Michigan. I'm sure that our Colorado folks that are on the screen, their eyes are probably rolling around like, you all have to really do all of that. Yeah, it is a very involved process that has to play out. And we understand that when it comes to elections and running elections, that it is a state-by-state process. And states have the rights to make many of the decisions on how elections are run, how they play out. And so for Michigan, jail voting again, and Michigan's not the only place, but jail voting again is a very complicated process, as you know, been laid out by Bonnie, when it comes to all of the pieces that we have to bring into play in order to attempt to make sure that those that have the right to vote can actually cast their ballot. And so just for more of an understanding from the legal landscape and in relationship to some of the changes in the voting laws, one of the things that Lisa did not say, and I believe is true, is that she's a lawyer as well. And so I'm going to call on Lisa to help give us an overview of the laws related to voting rights for incarcerated individuals, and also discuss the distinction between pretrial detainees and those serving a sentence.
Thank you, Charles. Yes, I am an attorney, but I'm a nice person. No. Anyway. So first of all, Section 2 of the Michigan Constitution gives the legislature the power to create laws to exclude persons from voting because of a commitment to a jail or a penal institution. And so we do have legislation in regards to that. So I'm going to cite statutes as a good attorney would. 168.492A, an individual who's confined in a jail and who is otherwise a qualified elector may, before trial or sentence, register to vote. The individual is considered a resident of the city or township and address at which he or she resided before confinement. An individual who is confined in a jail after being convicted and sentenced is not eligible to register to vote. And then there's another section, 168.758B, which states a person who in a court of this or another state or in a federal court has been legally convicted and sentenced for a crime for which the penalty imposed is confinement in jail or prison shall not vote, offer to vote, attempt to vote, or be permitted to vote at an election while confined. But I think if, as we've said, like one thing about Michigan is once you have served that sentence, though, you have the right to vote again. I mean, it's been in the news, I think more in the last 2 years than ever about states that are really looking at changing their laws, that they have barred people who have completed their sentence from getting that right restored. So Michigan, that's one thing that we've been good on for a very long time. And that is that once you've completed your sentence, you have the right to vote again, unlike other states who are now trying to catch up to us on that. But the difference for us, as far as someone who is incarcerated currently, it's if they're awaiting sentencing, they still have the right to vote and cast that ballot.
Thank you, Lisa. And I'm going to also add to that Michigan, yes, when it comes to our laws, we have a lot of work that has been done to make voting access or the access to the ballot, if I can use this term, more accessible. And so, kudos to our county clerks, our municipal clerks, our Secretary of State, and organizations like VAC, like Promote the Vote, like League of Women Voters, Voting Access, all of these organizations are out here doing a lot of work to make sure that there is access to the ballot. But before I move from there, Lisa, I just want to go back to the new voting laws. And I want to go back there for this reason, and if you can help me with addressing it. One of the things that we have been trying to wrestle with and come to some real conclusion about how we can make this work for folks who have this right is that we have all of these new voting laws that make the ballot more accessible. But yet, when it comes to jail voting and those that are in the facilities, it seems as if they don't have the ability to execute those rights as everyone else does who are not in the facility. Do you have any thoughts on that at all?
So I think one issue is that Michigan, and how our elections are administered, we are different from 46 other states in that we are decentralized. Yes. So it's not, so for my Colorado friends on here, it is not run all at the county level. And so it's a different animal in that when you're talking about a group of people who are all, yes, residing under the same roof, but they are registered in all different places. So like, when I've gone to our jail and I'm registering folks over there, first of all, not all of them are from Oakland County. So we can't, you can't vote in person in Oakland County in a different ballot. I mean, what we have is people basically voting absentee in our jail. To set up an early voting site, you've got people from all different communities. So it's a challenge, I guess I'll say, right? To make that because I can't make it a precinct. I mean, I don't do precincts. That would be the local clerk. That would be the Pontiac clerk, because that's where our county seat is and where our jail is. But most of the folks that are residing in the county jail right now are not from Pontiac. So they can't vote the Pontiac ballot unless they then change their voter registration to be, the jail address. So it's more complicated than, I don't want to say than it should be, but I don't know how else to word it.
Yes, and I understand it. And I know that was a difficult question. I just wanted to know if you had any thoughts because we are experiencing the same difficulties with coming up with a concrete answer. And we have been doing a lot of work when it comes to trying to create a jail voting policy that can be introduced and maybe passed into law to make this a little less complicated. But I appreciate your expressing the complication even from the clerk's end.
Yeah. Charles, could I say a word here?
Yes, go
Yeah.
ahead.
So the other night we had a sheriff's forum at Washtenaw County, and one of the questions that came from VAC was about voting. How are they going to ensure voting rights in Washtenaw County for those in jail? And I think that, first of all, that's something that everybody can do when there's an election for the sheriff, is to make that a priority in the forums, or the leagues could do something of that sort also. And the other thing that I was realizing that I think it was, and somebody can correct me on this, but out in the West, one of the district attorneys offered a forum inside the jail on voting, because I think one of the issues is that people feel not engaged in it, and maybe you're going to get to this more later, not engaged in the voting process. And having a forum, I thought, was just amazing. They did it in Philadelphia years ago for the district attorney there. And I think that would be engaging more people in the voting process as well. So, sorry, I hope I. Okay.
Oh, no problem. And yes, they have had at least, I believe, 2 forums inside of the Genesee County Jail. And but again, it just goes back to the fact that there is no process in place when it comes to policy that dictates how it is that jail voting, what it should look like. And so each individual county, each individual administrator of the carceral facilities kind of have a lot of autonomy when it comes to what that process will look like. And we'll talk more about that later. But I want to move to the question of felony disenfranchisement. And I want to put it before Tony first, and then maybe if everybody else wants to add to the conversation. But if you could talk to us a little bit about felony disenfranchisement, Tony, and discuss some of the misconceptions about eligibility when it comes to incarcerated citizens. And I'll just start it off by saying that there are a lot of people that are working within the system. And when I say the system, I'm talking about all the way back, all the way through when you're talking about probation officers and things of that nature, that are not giving really good information to folks when it comes to re-entry and what their rights are when it comes to voting. A lot of folks that are that have served their sentence and are outside of the facilities still don't understand that they have the right to vote based upon some misinformation and maybe disinformation that exists out there. But Tony, if you could talk to us a little bit about that, as well as felony disenfranchisement.
Absolutely, and thank you, and kudos for the conversation, right? I think Clerk Brown kind of hit the nail on the head of how complex it is to really get a policy in place for the state of Michigan, just because we're so decentralized. But I think we can figure out some stuff, right? Because we have to, right? This is a constitutional right. I've been screaming this for a very long time. At some point, we gotta take it seriously as we take all our constitutional rights. Regarding felony disenfranchisement, the way I see it play out, right, even in the jails, because we look at the news, we all look at the news, and we all hear how voting works, and we hear how other states, right, a large amount of states in the United States of America sometimes permanently remove people's right because they have a felony conviction. How that plays out as you go into the jail is people have this as that belief system, right? That they've been charged, they're in jail, or even once they're convicted, like they think like that this is what's going on because they've seen it in Florida or maybe in Mississippi, a lot of southern states where people permanently lose their right to vote, right? Now, I'll say that Michigan is moving forward in making sure that people leaving the MDOC are automatically registered to vote unless they opt out. So we are moving in the right direction to kind of deal with some of the myths that people have as it goes to felony convictions. But those myths are still there. And I think Charles touched on a point, right? Because we will have people in not elected officials necessarily, but people working in various departments that also didn't know that people with felony convictions can vote in the state of Michigan. Like, oh, they can't vote. Yes. And so that, I think, is something that we'll be battling with for some time, but I think we're moving in a direction to really kind of kill that myth. On the other side of, how difficult it is in engaging folk in the jail, I think that's only, Margaret, you're right. We do got to engage folk. But that's difficult too, right? Just because of how jails are physically laid out and sheriff's willingness to let people come in and engage folk, right? And so this is why this is really a policy discussion and not necessarily an individual sheriff, county by county discussion, as it has been for so long. I hope I answered your question too, Charles, before I move.
I just want to dig in just a little bit deeper before we move on. On the felony disenfranchisement is a real big conversation, as you stated, because of the fact that the rules of the game are different. Rules of the road are different depending on what state you're in. And then when you dig deeper into Michigan, as we've already discussed, the rules of the road for just those that have the right to vote are different depending on the county and the facility. But just can you just kind of lay it out for us when it comes to what your rights are if you have a felony in the state of Michigan?
With respect to voting.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Yes.
I'm going to say, okay, you go get me on my soapbox now, Charles. Okay, if you have a felony conviction in Michigan, you absolutely have the right to vote as long as you're not confined at the time of voting. That means even if you're on tether or some other type of restrictive confinement, as long as, again, it's not jail and prison, you can vote in the state of Michigan. And you can vote, obviously, while you're in jail, as long as you haven't, as Clerk Brown mentioned, as long as you haven't been convicted and you're confined. Hold on. Clerk Brown, is it a technicality? And I think I talked to the Secretary of State about this. I don't want to open up a can of worms, but doesn't it say sentenced as opposed to just convicted? So I think under our law, you can actually vote all the way up to sentencing, even if you're convicted.
An individual who is confined in a jail after being convicted and sentenced is not eligible to register to vote.
Convicted and sentenced, so both of those things in place.
So yeah, that's what the statute says, 168.492A.
Yep. And so thank you, Clerk Brown. That's why it's good to have a lawyer and a clerk and one person that can speak to question. And so, yeah, you have a constitutional right the day you go into a jail. Michigan has expanded its voting in a lot of ways, and now you have absentee vote by mail for any reason, right, in Michigan. So that means once people are in jail, they should be trying to get registered and getting that absentee ballot over to them. I just wonder with respect to the location, Clerk Brown, that we always run into. Why can't people just register at the doggone jail?
They can, but remember that could change your then driver's license or your state ID. So I mean, if you're talking about so that it could be an early voting site or a precinct inside of the jail so that everybody can have those other options besides absentee voting. And just for those who don't know, the difference with absentee voting versus voting in a precinct or an early voting site is the ability to put your ballot in a tabulator. And, people spoil ballots. In our August primaries, you can only vote, we say stay in your lane, you can only vote for one party's candidates. If you flip your ballot over and you vote for a candidate in another party, you've just spoiled your whole ballot. You don't know that when you return it absentee. So putting in the tabulator spits it back out at you, and then you have the option to remedy that. So limiting somebody to only absentee, you're limiting their ability to, you know, avoid having a spoiled ballot. But it would affect state ID and all that sort of thing. And you're supposed to, I mean, the law says unless we change that part of the law, it does say where you resided before you ended up in the jail. So I can get into this later, but I have registered folks who they lost their home while they were awaiting sentencing. And so I did have them register as the jail as their address. And honestly, I then checked to make sure everything went through. I know I'm getting off topic, but found that the address was not in the street index in the qualified voter file, and then worked with the state to have our jail's address added so that ballots could be sent and that they were registered to add an address. So that it's not just like registering folks, but it's making sure that that address is actually in the street index for the qualified voter file, because otherwise, you know, it's not helpful, right? They're not going to get a ballot sent there. So I know, sorry, I went off topic a little bit, but.
No, that was helpful for me. I'm sorry. I just took some notes. Charles, please go carry on.
Okay, and let me, I just want to say very quickly, and then I want to give everybody else a chance if they want to chime in on the felony disenfranchisement conversation. And if you all don't mind, I just want to give a little bit of history of incarceration in the United States. Now, prior to slavery being abolished, and I do that with air quotes, the majority of the population, the prison population, was not African-American citizens. But that turned after slavery was abolished, and we understand, you know, what the 13th Amendment allows for in some of the state constitutions. And so when we go back, we can see a picture of the incarceration levels exploding with people of color, and the evolving of the prisoner leasing program and all of the things that are involved in that. And so I'm saying that to say that when it came to this strategy, if I can call it really what it really is, it included slapping felonies on people in order to take away their rights, to disenfranchise them. And so and just putting that out there, do any of you on the panel have any thoughts that you want to share when it comes to that conversation of felony disenfranchisement, even though it is not the case in Michigan? It is still the case in many states around the United States that even after you have served your sentence, even after you have, quote unquote, paid your debt, you're still disenfranchised because the system, including that involves prosecutorial discretion, has slapped felonies on people and disenfranchised them. So any thoughts you want to throw in there right now on that subject? We're open to it. We're in good time for now, unless I keep talking. But if you any thoughts that you want to share on that particular subject.
Sure, I'll add. This is Bianca from Colorado Black Women for Political Action. We know that is by design. It is to make sure that Black and brown people don't have the right to participate in what we call democracy, right? So this country is a democracy. What is democracy? It's voiced by the people. And we have a representative democracy. So we vote for who we want to represent our voice when it comes to creating legislation, when it comes to creating legislative power. So in order to keep power to a select few, they want to disenfranchise those who have been. So I think if anybody should have the right to vote, it should be people who have been incarcerated, because they have been a part of the quote unquote system. And so in order to keep the power to a select few,
so that the legislation and the laws reflect what they want. They want to take away the right to choose. And that's why I think that it's very important for people like us on the panel, make sure that we continue to tell the story, or make sure that we paint the best picture that we can about voting. Because there's so much apathy in this country, and there's so many lies, especially in this current political climate. You know, we hear all the time, especially from Black and brown communities, voting doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. My vote doesn't count. Well, if it doesn't count, look at all the different states, especially Louisiana. Oh my God, they're making it even harder and harder. Down south, you know, different places, they're making it harder each time, each legislative go round. There's a different barrier. You can't hand out water for people who are standing in long lines. You can't give people food. They're changing where people can even go and vote. They're closing polling locations. So we know that it's by design and it's a setup. And I know, and I'll say that I love to brag that Colorado gets the reputation of being the golden standard in this place. And so you all know, sorry, Lisa, you're catching up to us. We're not catching up to you. You're catching up to us. And I will say, Yasmin, if you can step in and just kind of talk about some of the work that you've done, and Allie, Allie,
Well,
no.
before we go there, because
Okay.
we have a large block for Colorado, because we
Oh, okay.
know when we get a little bit further on, we have a large block of time set aside for Colorado to talk about the fantastic work that you all are doing out there. On that subject, Bianca, I just want to give a shameless plug and shout out to my aunts who are Selma foot soldiers and the work that they've done, and that's the legacy that I'm building off of when we talk about votes. And we do sessions where we go all the way back into history to the Constitutional Convention and talk about who was and who was not allowed to vote based upon it being tossed to the states. And so we know that voting has value. We have a program called Value of the Vote. And so, everything that you said is true. I mean, and now they're coming back with these vagrancy laws, and you know, it's stunning. But Colorado, if you want to speak directly to felony disenfranchisement, but you have a large block as we go further on where you can talk about all the great work you all are doing out there. That we really need to be able to, maybe kind of build towards.
Yes, thank you, Charles. I'm gonna wait until it is my turn to speak about the amazing work that we have been able to do in Colorado, because there's a lot to unpack. So I will hold off just for right now, but I look forward to continuing the conversation.
All right, that sounds good. So I'll just go to the next subject, and that is the changes to the voting laws. And I'm going to ask Lisa and Carolyn to talk to us a little bit about Michigan's automatic voter registration for individuals exiting prison.
I do want to add one other thing, if I may, and as far as the disenfranchisement, and I think that there has been a lack of education for when people, whether out on parole or they completed their sentence inside, whatever. I remember standing outside of a precinct, campaigning for a friend, on election day, saying, hey, will you vote for this person? And somebody walked by and said, I can't, I'm a felon. And I said, yes, you can. Yes, you can. But it was,
Right.
It was years ago before we had same-day voter registration. So, my heart broke that they were walking around thinking they didn't have that right here. And honestly, it hurt my heart. And I thought, why do they not know that? But, they may have come from another state. And yes, hats off to Colorado. I was just saying Michigan was good on one thing. We're catching up. We're catching up on others, but that one thing we've been good on. So, but as far as the new law, that doesn't take effect until June 30th, 2025. I think that's to give the Secretary and the Department of Corrections time to figure out this program. But it will, as Tony already referenced, will give folks the ability to automatically be registered to vote. They can decline if they want, but it's on release from incarceration imposes a sentence, or either finished the the maximum of their time of their sentence or upon probation. So look forward to that being created and that taking effect next, a little over a year, unfortunately, because I think it takes time to get these programs situated. But I think hopefully with this legislation, this already in law, even though it hasn't taken effect yet, that the education starts now. And so instead of maybe being automatic through a program, it'll be part of the, okay, you're about to walk out the door. Don't forget, you can register to vote, or here's a voter registration form. And that's been a change, as well as having different state agencies being able to register people as well.
Yeah, so I don't think I can add much more to that part of it. But I do know from Felicia Brabeck, who's a representative, that the House did pass the offering the people coming out of prison their ID and their driver's license. And it passed in the House, and it's waiting now in the Senate. So that's something that will happen, or hopefully will happen if it goes forward. I also wanted to say, to support what Bianca, she doesn't need my support. We have plenty of history on this, but Florida, it seems to me Florida's vote to, allow people who coming out of prison to vote, and then people went and voted, and then they were pulled back because they hadn't paid their fees. So, I mean, that's again, Black and brown and poverty people, people who couldn't pay their fees are being punished after they've come out. So again, that's the I feel like we continue to punish people after they've served their time, they've done their time, they've been accountable, and we continue to do that. And I just want to mention that there's 2 states, Maine and Vermont, and now Washington, D.C., who do allow those inside of those incarcerated to vote. And there is some movement in some of the states, and I'd like to see Michigan do that, but that's not going to happen until prison gerrymandering passes, to allow people incarcerated to vote. So, okay, thanks.
Having those fines, making that an issue, it's a poll tax all over again.
Right.
And Carmen has addressed some of that in the chat. There's a question, and we'll deal with that as we get further on. But I would like to just on that same question before we move on, the front end work, because all of this has a tie-in. And when I say the front end work, when people who have the right to vote in jail are being processed, why is it, and maybe it is being done, I don't think it is, that ID process is not taking place, which would have a tie-in to a home address and help us deal with prison gerrymandering? What is going on with that? Where I know it's been in our conversations in our coalitions, but why? And I guess maybe why is not the question, but well, I'm going to use why. Why is it that we cannot at intake? God forbid that anybody has to go through that process at all. But at intake, I give folks IDs and register them to vote, and have a database of what their actual home address is, which would help us with the prison gerrymandering question, all wrapped into one big bubble. And I'll throw that at Lisa. Sorry, Lisa.
Okay, so are you saying a new state ID with that address? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, if they don't have ID, if when it comes to the question of prison gerrymandering, the question is where you're going to be counted in, and the answer that has come back currently is that there's no database that exists with incarcerated citizens' actual home address. And so if we're talking about voting, if we're talking about registration, which is automatically done for citizens who go to the Secretary of State, why can there not be any Secretary of State engagement at intake where IDs are given, addresses are recorded, registration takes place like it does for all other citizens, and we establish that database that deals with prison gerrymandering? I know that's probably a lot, but
that's
it's
a
really
lot,
one
and
thing.
I'm not the Secretary of State, but so I mean, I can tell you, like, so I guess I'm getting hung up on this ID part that you're saying, because if you're
Okay.
saying like kind of like a new driver's license or a state ID.
Mhm.
We have the same issue with college students, right? So kids who, you know, my son's at Michigan State, well, he just graduated, but he was at Michigan State. And, you know, his driver's license is here. It's an insurance issue. I mean, there's a lot of issues as far as where your address is, what your address is on your driver's license. And really, again, I mean, so that's it. To me, and you're saying gerrymandering, but if you're putting everybody who's sleeping under the jail roof as registered there, instead, right? So I mean, now that's gerrymandering because they're not. If they're not, our jail's in Pontiac, they're not from Pontiac, they don't know the people there. You want to register, you want to vote in the community that you know, right? Your
Absolutely.
home where you are. So we don't want to change. I mean, I don't want to say we,
No,
but
no, no, no.
so
And
there's
I'm
a hesitation to changing their address so
No,
that that's their, okay.
And I'm not saying change their address. I'm saying what their address actually is. There's no database that exists of what their actual address is. And that's,
So,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
okay, well, I was just gonna say, you know, I think it was the first time I went over to the jail and I was registering a young man who, and when I say young, he was young. He was in there before he ever had a driver's license, so he did not have a state ID number, and he had never had a job. He was a young teen. On the voter registration form, you need to either put your state ID number, you know, your driver's license number, or if it's a state ID, or the last four of your social security number. And he said, I don't know either of these. And the corrections officer said, I can help out. I can look that up. I've got his social in the computer. And so they pulled it up. So, I mean, and so that he could finish and, you know, complete his voter registration and make sure that it was acceptable and everything was filled out. So I don't know that they don't have addresses. I know that when most of the people that I'm interacting with when I'm over there, they're already registered to vote. I'm just giving them an application for an absentee ballot. So it's, here's where I live, or here's where I would be sleeping if I weren't here. But you know, mail my ballot here to the jail.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. And I don't want to get too far behind, but go ahead,
Okay.
Carmen.
So I feel like the question that you're asking is, why couldn't intake be considered an automatic voter transaction, which would then put the onus of registration onto jails to register everyone who comes through who is eligible? And I don't know that is that your question, or is that not?
No, because in Michigan now, when you have any interaction with the Secretary of State, you know, if you go to get your driver's license, if you go to renew your license plate, all of these, any interaction, you go in and you're automatically registered if you're not registered. And I'm saying that citizens who are going through this process, if all of this is done at intake, why would they not? And it goes back to the earlier question of the rights that we have and how do those transfer over so that folks who have those same rights, even though they're just as impacted, how do they have the ability to take advantage of those rights? And so if I go to the Secretary of State right now and I renew my driver's license and I'm not registered, I'm automatically registered. And I'm saying the same, why can that process not be the same at intake for anybody, you know, that is not registered? So it's more a question of not the, you know, the facility engaging in all these registrations. It's okay, just afford them the same rights that you afford me, because they have those rights. When you engage with the Secretary of State, you're registered. And then, you know, and then we talk about the database of addresses. So that's more of what I'm talking about. Does that make sense? And I'm sorry, I got us way off track with my questions. So I'm going to keep it moving and then talk about legislative advocacy efforts. Tony, you want to talk to us a little bit about where we are with legislation in Michigan?
Absolutely. And again, I'll be brief because I want to hear from Colorado. They are inspiring us right now. For a long time in Michigan, just to offer some frame, um, the issue of jail-based voting has been an issue that often when we talk to lawmakers, their eyes kind of glass over. Like, what is this guy talking about? And why is he talking to me about this stuff? But finally, right? Finally, the issue is getting some traction, and we actually have some legislative champions that are ready to take on this fight. And so we're looking at a few different things. One, I don't know if it's gonna happen, but I would love. I don't. First, let me premise: nothing is gonna happen this session. Um, so whatever we get dropped, it'll really be for next election, next cycle, when we could really start working on it. But one of the things I would like to see all sheriffs required to register everybody during the intake phase. Again, the sheriffs, when we had our our stakeholder meeting with them, they were none too happy with me for suggesting this. They said that this would make their life miserable and blah, 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 and on and on. Another thing we would love to see is to require that there be a voting policy in every county jail. Right now, that is not the case. So we don't know what county jails are doing or what they plan to do or if they plan to do anything at all. It seems common sense to require that they create a voting policy like they have policies around everything else in a county jail to ensure that people have access to the ballot. I think those are the two high level things, and I'll kind of step out the way, Charles, and let some other people chime in.
Yeah, and we do have to deal with the autonomy that exists with the sheriffs, just to be quite frank. But I'm going to keep it moving because I've talked my way into where we're behind, and we definitely want to hear from Colorado. But Lisa, can you talk to us a little bit about what you're doing at Oakland County?
Sure. So I want to preface it by saying, you know, I had a couple people from other groups reaching out to me, having trouble getting into the jail to do voter registration and education. And I had reached out to the undersheriff and, you know, tried to get them connected. And there just sort of seemed to be a little bit of a wall there. And the information was dropped off, or they had dropped, and it has staple in it. And, you know, so then I was told by the jail, no, it can't have a staple in it. All right, what if we send it electronically? All these other things. So there just seemed to be a lot of, I don't know, walls for other people to come in, for groups, for activist groups like that are on this call. And so I said, well, how about if I come over and do it? And so that's really how it started, because of all these other people not being able to get in. And they have been very gracious about letting me and my staff come over. They've reached out to say, hey, what days can you come this year? We're going the end of June for plenty of time for the August primary. And then again, in the end of September, I believe, for the November general. And my team and I, you know, some of my team members and I have gone over, and it depends on which block we're in as far as how we're interacting with the folks in there. But the folks over there, the lieutenant gives us a list, or doesn't give us a list, but passes out to the different correction officers as to who in which cell block is eligible. So they kind of do that pre-screening for us, because I don't know who's currently serving, who's been sentenced, who's where, you know, where they are in their process. So we, depending again on the block, either folks are coming out and we're at a table and we're doing it, or, you know, I'm passing it through the bars. We're making sure that whoever wants to vote. It's interesting. I often got asked, like, you know, if somebody specific is on the ballot, and then it's like, oh, if they're not on the ballot, I don't care. Which is normal. Like, that's a totally normal thing. I get that everywhere. But it's good to see that engagement, right? Like, I mean, I wish people voted in every election. But anyway, so we go over to the jail, and we go block by block and either register or give them the form for an absentee ballot. And I can tell you, I don't know how it came. There was an absentee ballot from what was it? The presidential primary that they inter-officed it to us on election day. And so we drove it over, and it happened to be a Pontiac voter. And so we went and gave it to the Pontiac clerk's office to make sure that that ballot did get counted on election day. So we have, I think, a good working relationship now with our jail, but I think as Tony said, like, that's county by county. You know, I'm happy to be doing this and making sure that everybody who has the right can exercise that right.
Yeah, and I want to say kudos to Lisa. Well, she's my county clerk, and I was one of the people that came knocking on the door, and we struggled forever to get inside the jail, and now they're there and doing good work. And so hats off to you, and many thanks.
Thank you. And I just got an email the other day, hey, from another group that said, we'd love to volunteer and come help you with that. I'm like, thank you, but it's only that it seems like they're only comfortable with me and my team. So happy to be doing it.
And we'll take it. We have to go hand in hand, but I mean, if it's working until we can do better and get some policy in place, we're extremely grateful for what you guys are doing up there. I'm gonna drop down. Yes.
Hey, I just wanted to chime in, going back to Tony's point. I just wanted to share, as you guys are like strategically thinking and brainstorming around how we can ensure that facilities and clerks are conducting voter registration inside their jails. What Colorado did was we were able to partner with the Secretary of State's office, bringing up, these issues to them and asking, okay, how can we figure out and make sure that the facilities are implementing voter registration within their facilities? And so what the county, or I should say, what the Secretary of State's office did was a rulemaking in 2018. They mandated a rulemaking 7.4, which mandated that sheriffs and county clerks work together to come up with a process and a plan for how their eligible voters inside would have access to voting. So I just wanted to share that with you as an idea for you guys to think through, and we can definitely talk offline to see how we could better support you guys. And so that's all I just wanted to share.
Yeah.
Just one little caveat with that, and that is Michigan, unlike Colorado, we're decentralized. And I think that some of my colleagues at the county level say voter registration is really for the local clerks to do. And they don't engage in it as much as like I do, or some of my other colleagues. So it's just different, that it's not, our elections aren't just done at the county level, that our city and township clerks have a really important role in our elections as well. So it gets to be almost like a turf war sometimes as to, who should be doing a certain thing. So I appreciate it. It's just, we're a little different. It's not as easy.
Yeah, it is that decentralization, and it rolls down into autonomy. And I'm going to drop down into the program because, again, we definitely want to hear more from Colorado. And Jasmine, I think that we definitely would be interested in, some folks from Colorado sitting in and maybe, taking a look at what we're doing. And so that maybe that's something that we can talk about, as you said, offline. But I want to drop down to talking about advocacy efforts and solutions. And I want to bring in Carmen right now and to just discuss some of the initiatives that are taking place in other states. And then we'll roll that into Colorado, where we'll look for everybody from Colorado to chime in.
Great. Thanks, Charles. So some legislative efforts to highlight related to jail-based voting, I think, are Colorado, Massachusetts, and Nevada. So Massachusetts and Nevada have both also mandated jail-based voting in all facilities across the state. They have very different processes from Colorado, which is really what makes Colorado stand out. So Colorado has in-person voting. They're a same-day registration state. So there are several things that just sort of put them, way ahead of the rest of us. In Massachusetts, they do their jail-based voting via absentee, and they're piloting a mobile ballot box initiative, which would allow residents of jails to put their ballots directly into a ballot box so that they're not handing it to multiple people, you know, on the way to it being submitted. I read that Nevada is having some challenges with implementation of their jail-based voting initiative, i.e. non-compliance by some counties. I think that the way that Colorado, this is my projection, is that the way that Colorado went about passing the law will result in a much higher level of compliance by sheriffs and clerks and the Secretary of State, because it was a very collaboratively developed bill, which I'm sure that Jasmine will talk more about. I'll also note that the inclusion of state-led efforts to include registration of residents in jails via automatic voter registration has happened now in Michigan. The implementation hasn't started, as I understand, but Michigan is the first state, and then New Mexico will be the second one to implement. And I think it's highly meaningful to include interactions in jails as automatic voter registration transactions, because that means that you have to offer residents of jails the opportunity to register to vote, and doing it in a way where people have to opt out rather than opt in is also really important. So Michigan and New Mexico are definitely at the forefront there. New Mexico has historically had significant issues with compliance with their automatic voter registration transactions through state agencies. And there is literally a 50-year history of non-compliance through the DMV. So I have a lot more hope placed in Michigan to show New Mexico how to do that well. The DMV is not under the Secretary of State in New Mexico. So the Secretary of State's ability to force the DMV to do what it's legally supposed to do is somewhat limited. And lawsuits have not yet produced the desired result related to the DMV's automatic voter registration in New Mexico. There are also, separate from legislative actions, there are also jail by jail efforts all over the country to do voter registration. Some of them are more organized than others. Some of them are more regular than others. But the amount of effort and the number of people registered is really impressive. So I put together a report a year ago detailing what the sort of policy landscape was related to jail-based voting, and then what the efforts were that were successful in a whole bunch of states. So obviously Washington, D.C. has a very old, very established, very regular program that is of really high quality, that successfully registers and enables many people to vote. Cook County, Illinois has a very, has a long-standing program that is efficient and effective. There are 3 jails in Texas that now have jail-based voting. There's also programs in New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Washington and California. If you're interested in digging into any of those programs more deeply, you can check out the Sentencing Project's website, which includes that landscape analysis of jail-based voting. I did it a year ago before I was aware of what Colorado was doing, so they are, they're conspicuously missing from that report. And then also on that website is further discussion about the history of disenfranchisement related to justice impacted people, with specific numbers in every state in the country. And we will have an updated report in September or October of this year that highlights how many people in each state are disenfranchised by those laws, and you'll see the wide variety of approaches by state, from Maine to Mississippi. So it will give you a good sense of what happens. It doesn't address jail-based voting specifically, but it addresses disenfranchisement. So please feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about what's happening in other states, or you would like connections with other clerks, Secretary of States, sheriffs, or community organizations that are, that are on the ground doing that registration and helping people vote. I assume my contact information is somewhere out there, but I can be reached at the Sentencing Project, and my name is and address is on that Sentencing Project website.
Yeah, Carmen, and if you could put that in the chat, that would be great. And I just want to say that as Carmen and Lisa, have both laid out to us, it's just so difficult. But at the same time, as Bianca has said, it is just so intentional. All of this confusion to disenfranchise the states' rights issue and the way that every state has the right to determine how their elections take place, and even have the right to determine who can vote, who can't vote. And so even when you would want to see some type of federal policy, which people scream and holler about, but it was the Voting Rights Act that was a federal policy that was put in place to keep from disenfranchising folks. And then you have Shelby versus Holder, and all. It's all just things that are thrown into the mix to muddle things and to make it more difficult for people to actually go and cast a ballot, because those votes really have value and they count. I've been told we can go a little bit over time. I'm behind, but I want whoever wants to go next from Colorado, come forward. We want to hear you all speak. Silence is not an option. You don't have the right to remain silent. I'll call you. Allie, talk to us.
Awesome. Excuse me. I am very excited to share more. I would love to kick things over to Jasmine in just a moment, because I think it's just absolutely incredible the work that the Colorado Criminal Justice Reform Coalition has led in our state on this issue, both at the ground level, so actually going into jails and physically providing that access, building those relationships, building those complex relationships with the jail staff, with the counties, with the sheriffs, doing all that work to actually provide that access, which laid the groundwork to all of this reform that they've been leading. And so something I'll share just from my perspective at Common Cause, back to that rulemaking that happened back in, I believe it was 2018, what we saw from that process, and I know that looks a lot different. I've heard a lot today and have learned a lot about just the differences between our centralized system versus what you are all wading through. What I'll say from that process that we learned, and we released a report on this several years later, was that sort of giving counties that requirement that they create some kind of meaningful access, we weren't seeing the delivery in a consistent way across counties, which I think was one of the main challenges that led to this bill this past year that now we're waiting for the governor's signature on, that is now providing that access to voting in county jails across the state. The inconsistencies in the way that counties were actually following through here was pretty severe. We had certain counties checking the box and meeting the letter of the law by just basically sending an email or creating like a one-page document saying, we're going to make sure people know about voting. And then the numbers speak for themselves. There was many counties had 0 ballots actually being cast, which just goes to show that it simply wasn't being prioritized. We had other counties that, were able to partner with CCJRC and actually get in there and make sure ballots were being delivered, and that voter education resources were making their way in, and that folks were being genuinely brought into the process. But because of that lack of consistency, that is really one of the main drivers that led to the legislative effort. Not to speak for Jasmine, since I know there's a lot of work that did go into sort of figuring out what is the right policy for Colorado and what's the right way to actually ensure that access is happening and that counties are held accountable. So we're just very excited to see this implemented. And what I'll also say is that there's going to be 61 county jails who are now required to provide that access thanks to this legislation. But we also know that along the way, there was resistance from clerks, from sheriffs, from folks in different positions in government who just were not seeing the pathway to be able to do this, or were just digging in their heels because they simply didn't want to. And so the next step is really monitoring that implementation and bringing in partners, bringing in legal volunteers to actually make sure that counties are submitting plans that are rooted in the law, that meet the expectations of what was passed, and that then they're actually doing that. And we're going to be working with folks who have federal monitoring capacity in institutional settings. Our partners in the disability community, Disability Law Colorado, they actually have the ability to go in and provide that oversight. And so really getting creative about how can we make sure this is actually happening. So that's the perspective I can offer, but I'll say that we were, a supporter in this space rather than a leader. So I'm sure there's much more that could be said, and maybe some things I didn't fully represent exactly perfectly. So I will step back here, but yeah, we're just so excited to see this happen and glad to be here today to share more.
Thank you, Allie. Jasmine or Bianca, which of you would like to go first?
I will go. Bianca's pointing. I will just add to Allie's point. The reason why we moved into this space and creating legislation like this, just to give you guys some data that we were able to analyze from 2020 to the 2022 general elections. We saw that there was 9,293 eligible electors that did not get the access to voting, which is a big problem, right? And so that is one of the reasons why we moved into this space and creating legislation like this, because people should not be missing the opportunity to voice for who they want in their elections. And so also I wanted to point out that with us creating all this amazing legislation, what jail-based voting does for our population is that it uplifts people, right? It uplifts their way of thinking. It uplifts their way of how they can give back to their communities. And so that's something that I really just wanted to shed light on, is that, voting is a powerful tool and it really helps rehabilitate people back into our communities. And that's what we want to see.
Yes, and we know that when citizens are engaged, they are less likely to be ones that are involved in recidivism. And so, yeah, that engagement is extremely important because they know that they are a part of the process and how our government actually works and how it impacts them. And so, yes, absolutely. Bianca? She wound up in the waiting room some way. While we wait for her to come back in, Ruth, I know I just put a question in the chat, but are there other questions that are out there?
Yes, there are. So the first question was partially answered, or someone answered already in the chat also, and it was about if there are any states that do allow incarcerated individuals to vote. And I wonder if we can just clarify further that incarcerated here always means pre-sentencing, or if there are states that allow those to vote who have been post-sentencing. Are there anything, is that?
Yeah. There's two, Vermont and Maine and Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
While incarcerated, after sentencing, you can vote.
Okay. And then maybe to build on that question a little bit, we might also explore if there's any noticeable changes in voter participation across the board. Do those programs or do those laws and rules change anything in the sort of overall state participation of voting, and or are there any other noticeable changes in those states because of those different rules?
I don't know the answer to that question in Maine, Vermont, or Washington without going back to those state advocates and asking them. I do know that in Colorado, in their two big programs in Denver, they had voter participation that was above the average of the communities from which people came, and they can probably speak to that better than I can.
Bianca, we were calling on you earlier, so maybe you can speak to that and whatever else you'd like to add about what's going on in Colorado.
I don't know what Yasmin said, but I don't know. Zoom is treating me really bad today. But but to answer your point, I don't know if Yasmin talked about the fact that there was higher turnout in midterm elections as it relates to incarcerated individuals than it was, those who were not incarcerated. So I think it speaks to the fact that people want the right to vote. People want access to vote, regardless if you're impacted by the judicial system or not. And I think what's really unique, though, is that our system is just so easy. It allows people, even if you're not, just the system that we've created here in Colorado, there should be no reason why you're not voting. Your ballot comes to you, you update your address, and automatically it goes to the updated address. I know that we're working on some pieces of legislation that maybe Allie wants to speak to, but even at other places, if you receive certain public services, that information is automatically impacted or given to you. I know Allie just said something. Did you want to expand on that, Allie?
Yeah, just to drive that point home, that the Denver County Jail had higher turnout than the citywide turnout for the 2023 municipal election. And that was CCJRC and the Denver County Clerk basically providing that model that then became the legislation to really show that folks do want to participate and do want that access. And one other thing I'll add to this is that in Colorado, when you are registered to vote, you begin receiving those ballots in the mail going forward. So something we're very excited about is that when folks are interacting with this process, getting registered, having that ability to navigate their eligibility and questions about their address and where they should register, going forward in the next election, the model that we have enables folks to then begin automatically receiving those ballots to the address that they provide when they register. So we're hopeful that that means that folks will have that continued access going forward. And also just reflecting on like people's relationship to democracy in the process. This is work that, like in my previous role, I did a lot of youth voter engagement. So interacting with a ton of first-time voters, folks who had never interacted with the process before. And there's just something to be said too about the relationship that we're building to the process with people, whether they voted before or not, having a positive experience and interaction and being empowered and given the resources and support to register, it's just proven to result in a higher likelihood to vote again in the future. And so I'm excited to see how that sort of, hopefully continues to support people to participate in the process.
Yeah,
and I'll say, I'm sorry, go ahead, Bianca.
I don't know if, Yasmin, did you talk about the bill that you all passed last week?
No, not yet, but I will be getting to that. I just also wanted to share that even though Colorado does have a robust mail-in ballot process, we have come to learn that that process does not always work, especially for people that are in confinement. And so that is one of the reasons why we push this legislation to encourage in-person voting. Because with in-person voting, our clerks are able to print ballots right then and there for those that didn't receive a ballot from the jail.
And I just want to
Charles, can I answer a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can she tell us the problems they saw with mail-in voting for people in the jail? Give us kind of some of the things they saw that made them push to go to more in-person.
To that point, so the challenges that we were seeing with the mail-in ballot process was that it was a timing issue, right? Because for our folks inside the jails, first of all, our jail turnover is every 10 days. So people are coming and going, right? And so it was really a timing issue for us that we were seeing with folks having a delay in receiving their ballots. And so that was one of the reasons why we pushed for in-person voting.
And can I say, and I'm going to lead into the question that I put in the chat as well. And I'm sorry, Ruth, but I'm going to, discretion here. With Ali and Bianca and what you all stated, with our system being so vastly different in the way that our elections are run with the decentralization that Lisa spoke about, one thing I'm definitely interested in and would like to have you all pass on to us as you continue to collect it is that data, that shows the increase in participation as these processes are played out to make it so that some of these accessibility issues are resolved. So we definitely would be interested in that data. But this question is to Lisa. And this goes back to, and I'm sorry, Lisa, I know I keep putting you on the spot, but with that decentralization question, one of the things that we've been discussing in trying to draft legislation is county clerks and their authority when it comes to handling ballots. And so my question was, because when you go to the facility, you're going to have ballots that come in from people inside and outside the county. And so what happens when you have a ballot that's, say, for Wayne County? What are your authorities? Do you have the authority to move that to Wayne County, to handle it at all?
So yeah, as an election administrator, yes, I can touch ballots. Normally, I'm not touching the ballots though. So, we're doing the voter registration or, giving them an absentee registration ballot, a form to register for an absentee ballot. We disperse those then to the appropriate local clerks, whether it's in Oakland County or not. I mean, we do have little mailboxes for all of our local clerks, but even when I go to high schools to do voter registration, I'm registering kids from outside of Oakland County. So we just forward those on. That one ballot that I talked about, I mean, that was a one-off that it just happened to come in, it was that last minute kind of ballot situation. But normally, the ballots are being mailed to the jail, and then they're mailing them back out so that they are, if they're within Oakland County, a lot of times they are interoffacing, is that a word? Putting them in the mail to my office, and then we're dispersing them with the local clerks. But if it comes to us and it's another, I mean, we'll get it there. I'm not going to sit there and hold it. I mean, I honestly, I think that would be violating my oath of office to hold on to a ballot and not make sure that it's getting counted when it's been returned, in time.
Yeah,
So.
But that definitely answers the question for us when we think in terms of drafting policy. As long as you have that authority, then we can think in terms of county clerks being the connection, because.
Listen, I don't want to speak for all my colleagues because I don't know that they're going to do what I'm just being real. Like,
No.
I love my colleagues. They're wonderful.
Yeah.
Everybody has a different bandwidth as to what they'll do. And again, some say, oh, I don't want to step on, my locals' toes, because they're the ones that should be doing the voter registration or whatever it is.
Right.
I do have a question for Colorado. Am I allowed to ask a question in regards to them bringing in
you can, but can I take Bonnie first and then you? But I do want to say that's why we were talking policy, so that it's the law that says this is what you have to do when it comes to that ballot. And so I know we know a lot of clerks and a lot of jail administrators are really not friendly to the process, and that's why we are looking at something in the form of policy. But Bonnie, and then Lisa, you're getting me in trouble with Lisa. I want you to know, Bonnie, but go ahead.
All right. Lisa, this is for you because you might have the most knowledge. So with implementing our new voting laws, now that we have 9 days of early voting, and what I love that you can get your absentee ballot, and then you can actually take that absentee ballot to the tabulator. So issue of timing, would that allow someone that maybe received their absentee ballot while in jail to leave with it and be able to submit it to the tabulator? Can they leave with it if they received it in jail?
That's a great question. I mean, legally and time-wise, they should be able to, absolutely. Absentee ballots are mailed out 40 days before, 45 to 40 days before the election. And early voting starts the second Saturday before, I mean, we say 9 days, but it's not leading up. It's not the 9 days right before the election because there's no early voting on Monday. So it is the second Saturday before the election. So if they receive their absentee ballot a month before, and I will say that we have had that occasion where, and we try and we get those ballot, we try and get them to, we let the clerk know, hey, this person's already been, is out and free, and please, you know, get them an absentee ballot to their home or whatever. But anyways, going back to your question, if they receive the ballot a month before, and then the next day they are released, they absolutely can hold on to that absentee ballot and take it in to their early voting site and put it in the tabulator there.
Do you think we need to put that in the policy? Like, or is that going to be another one that's not, you know, it's going to be met with resistance that they leave with it? Or do you think that that will be something?
You know, I think I mean, listen, everyone now has that ability, and there are people who are choosing not to do that. I'm encouraging people to do that because of that reassurance that you didn't spoil your ballot, you didn't overvote in November, whatever the case may be that could cause an issue with a race or your entire ballot being spoiled. But I've talked about it with many groups of people and then asked, okay, would you go early vote? And most of them, no. I mean, so, you know, I'm encouraging it, but I don't know that it needs to be a policy, maybe an education. And that's what I'm really working on. Everybody learning that they can bring their absentee ballot to an early voting site. That's something everybody needs to learn.
Good point.
Yeah.
Excellent point.
There's one other question in the chat, and a few people have already had to drop off, and we'll take that question. But there was one other thing that I wanted to mention in the laws that just went into place on February 13th in Michigan, and that is the new, I believe it's called Notice and Cure law, where up to 3 days after the election, you have that amount of time to cure your ballot. And if the ballot comes in and there are some issues, that clerk.
No, sorry.
Nope, okay,
It's not
come on.
with the ballot itself. So it's not like, oh, you cross parties in the August primary, because remember, we don't know it's your ballot. Your return envelope. It's with the outer envelope if there's a signature missing.
Okay.
Okay, it's not issues with the ballot itself. It's really
Okay.
your signature to be able to cure that, or it's not a signature match from what's in the qualified voter file. That's what you have the ability to cure.
Okay.
We wouldn't know it's your ballot, Charles, because your envelope that had your name on it and your ballot are separated, and nobody knows it's your ballot.
Thank you for correcting me, and that way I won't be going around giving out bad information. But there's one other question in the chat, Ruth. If you could go ahead and ask that, and we'll field that, and then we'll let everybody go with our great thanks.
Yeah, it was partially answered in the chat, but by Bonnie, and maybe you want to take this again too. It's about voter education going along or hand in hand with voter access. And I'd be interested also in hearing how Colorado is handling this issue. So the question is, scroll back to it. The question is, are there educational programs that work in concert with jail-based voting? It is great to be registered, but if you don't know anything about the process of voting or don't know where to access information about candidates and issues, it is harder to exercise your right to vote. And maybe Bonnie, I think the question is in part to VAC, if that's part of the policy that you're putting forward. And then, but I'd also be interested to hear how Colorado is dealing with voter education as well as voting access.
I'll let Ali and Yasmin speak to this because they're the experts, but I do know that when people are leaving incarcerated facilities, they get a significant amount of information about who's on the ballot, how to vote, where you can vote, where you can register. If you were registered before you were incarcerated, of course you have to register again, but you're given that information once you leave the facility.
I will go ahead and chime in. So what CCJRC has been able to do, we actually just started this year, but at the Denver jails, we have been able to come in to teach a civics class. And so that's how we are educating our people inside around the importance of elections work, the different types of elections, the roles and responsibilities that each candidate has, you know, the years of how long each elected official is in office. And we're doing all of this in partnership with the Denver Election Division, which also helps brings, you know, talking about the whole voting process, right? How ballots are casted, and how can folks get in touch with their elected officials? How do issues get on ballots? So those are the teachings that we are able to do inside the jails, and it's not within any of our policy issues that we have been able to pass in the state of Colorado. But we are working to organize and train more organization partners, community organization partners that are interested in this work, with just educating them with the curriculum to help continue the education inside the jails.
You have a guide too, Yasmin, right? You have a booklet or pamphlet?
Yes.
Yes.
So one of the things that we also did in the jails was that we conducted a survey to really hear feedback from our folks inside of how we can better the program. And one of the asks were to create a Colorado voting guide that literally breaks down Colorado elections. And so that's another material that we distribute inside the jails to help folks, you know, educate themselves around the importance of voting and, again, how elections work in our state.
Yes, and that's absolutely something we are going to pick up on. I know that there's been a request from the League of Women Voters for 500 voter guides that they put out, and they will be put into the hands of one of our advocacy partners to distribute within the jail, because that is an extremely important piece. But this is really the last question, the one that I didn't allow Lisa to ask.
I do want to add, as far as voting instructions, I did put it in the chat in regards to that question, like, how do you know not to cross parties? Those instructions are in every absentee ballot. So that kind of technical thing should be with every absentee ballot. I just had a question for Colorado, and it sounded like that you brought in ballot on demand to the jail to be printing the ballots there. But I mean, don't you have people and I don't know, because we're decentralized, so I'm trying to understand, but do you have people from other counties within the jail? So how do you have the ability to print ballots for people that are from another county?
So we print out statewide ballots. So it's been very difficult, especially for folks inside that are from different counties. And so what the Denver election has done for those that are from out of counties, just print them statewide ballots. So that's the only.
Oh, so they're not getting the ability to vote for every candidate then? Is that what you're saying? They're not voting for their local candidates. They're just voting at the statewide level? Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I brought up something everybody didn't know, did you?
That's
I mean, that's kind of I don't know. That's kind of a voter suppression in of itself, but I mean, I appreciate they're getting, you know, what you're doing and everything, but they're not getting to vote for the local races is an interesting quandary there. That's why I was asking, like, how do you do that? Trying to get an idea of how, but thank you. Okay. Sorry for the technical.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and close it out. I know that Jennifer wants to go home today.
Well, yes, but I also am required to leave the building.
Right. So just a fantastic discussion, and we could go on forever. But I'm really glad that we got to lay out how difficult this process is, and how the difficulties have led to disenfranchisement, and we are always in the process of trying to figure this thing out. But we want to make sure that everybody, wherever they are, that has the right to vote, that they do not have any barriers placed in front of them to keep them from voting. And so we're working on local levels, we're working on county levels, statewide levels, and well, federal level is going to be a hurdle that is, well, I'll just say the federal level is going to be extremely
Well, the elections
difficult.
are more local than the federal.
Absolutely, yeah. And so when it comes to federal policy surrounding jail voting, that might be a hurdle that is too high to climb. But we have to start where we are. We have to not be satisfied with what is, and keep doing the work to try to ensure that every citizen that has the right to vote can vote, because all of our lives are on that ballot. And we all ought to have the right to have a say in who it is that is governing us and who it is that is executing power over us. They actually work for us and not vice versa. And so we have to my mind, put ourselves back in a demand space to say, these are the things that you need to do minimally to be in compliance with the law while we work to improve on the laws. And so with that, again, I want to thank you all. I want to thank the Detroit Public Library. I want to thank the great panel. I want to thank you all that just came in to add to the discussion. And I am hoping and believing that something's been said here that is really going to cause us to have more intense thought about what we can do to make sure that nobody in America is disenfranchised. Thank you all again. Have a good rest of your evening. And
Cheryl has just reminded me that I should put the link for accessing the recording later.
yes, and that will be good.
And that will be in a couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And my chat has closed. So
thank you, Jennifer. I've also added links of resources for people who are interested in being able to make contact with all of our incredible panelists today. We're so very thankful for all of you, especially on such short notice. So thank you.
yes.
So if you want to connect with any of the panelists, want more information about the organizations or the work that's being done, please find that list of resources. We'll also send it out in an email follow-up afterwards.
And I know that we've got more to cover. So we will address this again.
We could do this again.
If you're interested.
Yes. Yes.
I was just going to add a caveat to Charles said we all have a lot to think about, but I think we're all here because we care, and we now can become ambassadors to continue this education outside of this Zoom and to let people know about their power to vote. So
yes,
challenge you all to go out and be ambassadors.
All right. And
thank you again, everyone, for coming.
Yes.
And thank you for the presenters.
Yeah. Shout out to Colorado. Go Nuggets.
Oh, yes.
My Warriors are out. So go Nuggets.
Okay. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.